I'm Angela and I'm studying for the Praxis in speech-language pathology. So in this video, we're going to break down the phonatory system and specifically the larynx, which is one of the key topics that we're going to need to know for the Praxis exam. So let's dive right in. In a nutshell, the phonatory system is responsible for producing the raw voicing that's later going to be shaped into speech through the resonatory and the articulatory systems. And in the next couple videos, I'll be using like a cookie analogy to explain how the raw voice, which I visualize as cookie dough, how that's turned into different sounds. It's actually one of my favorite topics and one of my favorite analogies to use, so I'm really excited to share it if you could tell already. In this video though, we are going to talk about the structures of the larynx, including the important cartilages, the musculature, the different folds. We're also going to talk about Bernoulli's law and the myoelastic-aerodynamic theory. Myoelastic-aerodynamic. It's way too many syllables in my opinion. But we're going to talk about that theory and how all of this ties together to actually produce the voice. Also, this is just like a side note, but it's something that I kind of think is important for me just to say. I'm like a big foundations person. So if you watched my first video about how I'm studying for the Praxis, you'll know that I'm not really doing any practice questions right now that are in the format of the actual Praxis questions. I've done like a couple here and there. Like for example, the Advanced Review website has a really great daily question that I've done like now and then. But I'm really trying to focus on just reorienting myself to all of the foundational information. So most of the videos I post are going to be based on that idea, because my theory is that if I really truly understand the foundational material and then those facts and the lists and all the yucky memorization kinds of stuff, I'm going to have much better leg up to use my own growing clinical thinking skills to answer the other questions like the Praxis has. So later in my studying journey, I'm going to switch over and focus on Praxis formatted practice questions. But for now, I'm gonna let myself let that go, and I'm just gonna focus on what's most important and what I think is most effective for me to do right now. Obviously, this is my own preferred strategy, but you should always do what you think works best for you and what's worked for you in the past. But I just wanted to be transparent and explain why I'm doing things the way that I am. So what I'm going over now might not be exactly I don't think that the Praxis just does the drill and answer kind of questions. It's more so how we can apply the material that we learn. But anyways, let's get back to the larynx. So we'll start right off with the cartilages. I'm gonna post the notes. They should be to my side, probably to this side. Usually that's where it puts it. So you'll be able to kind of follow along. If you'd like your own copies of them, feel free to save them off of Instagram or TikTok. I also have them uploaded on Pinterest. I think that's easier to save it because you can actually download it into your Photos app on your phone. But there are 6 important cartilages to know and then 1 bone. We're going to start at the very bottom and then we'll just move our way up. So the very bottom of the larynx, we have the cricoid cartilage. This is sometimes considered to be the topmost tracheal ring. And it's a full ring, so it goes all the way around, and it's shaped like a Super Bowl ring where the main part is it's really big, and then it tapers down to the opposite side, and the opposite side is really small. That analogy, though, has gotten me confused in the past. So when I first learned that, I thought that the ring analogy meant that the big part was in the front, but it's not. The big part's on the back is posterior, and then the small part is anterior. I used to get myself really turned around when I would look at diagrams. Anyways, the next cartilage moving up is the biggest one in the larynx, and that's the thyroid cartilage. It's just one cartilage, but it has 2 lamina, which are just the flatter parts that are on either side. So those are the parts that come off of here and here to meet like that. They meet in the middle and they form the thyroid or the laryngeal prominence, which we more commonly know as the Adam's apple. And then right on top of that Adam's apple, there is the thyroid notch. So that's it would be right here. So the notch. So my pinkies would be the Adam's apple. And right above that is the thyroid notch. Finally, there's also 4 different cornu or cornua or horns. There are 2 inferior ones that jut out the bottom and then 2 superior horns that jut out of the top. They're kind of like tent stakes or flag poles that muscles and ligaments attach to. So the next cartilages then are going to be on the posterior side of the larynx. So flip it around in your mind. If you're looking at the diagram, it would be on the right if you're looking on the notes. So there are 3 pairs of cartilages that we need to know when we're looking at it from the back. The biggest ones are on the bottom, and those are the arytenoids. They're just above that back part of that cricoid cartilage. These are really important for moving the vocal folds together and apart, which is adduction, put them together, and abduction, to pull them apart. On top of each of those, there's a little bitty cartilage called the corniculate cartilage. I always remember it because it makes the arytenoids kind of look like a wonky looking candy corn. So the top part is, it looks like the top piece of a candy corn. So you know how a candy corn has 3 layers? It's got that bottom one, the middle one, and then the top little triangle. That to me is the corniculate cartilage because it's candy corn. So right in front then, and kind of above those arytenoids, are what are called the cuneiform cartilages. These are another really small cartilage. They're wedge-shaped cartilages that sit under the airy epiglottic folds, which we're going to talk about later. And they help to tense those folds when are needed, more so for protecting like the airway. I remember this one. It's kind of like a niche way to remember it, but it helped me, and hopefully it helps you solely because it's kind of an odd analogy. I remember, so probably like middle school or late elementary history class forever ago, we talked about one of the first writing systems, which was called cuneiform. And those people who used cuneiform used a wedge-like tool to make marks in the clay. So the cuneiform cartilage looks like the wedge that they used to write when they were writing cuneiform. So that's how I remember which one is which, because sometimes in my mind I will flip around the cuneiform and the corniculate, but the cuneiform is a wedge, corniculate, top of a candy corn. The last cartilage is a really important one for safe feeding and swallowing, and it's the epiglottis. It's shaped kind of like a leaf, and this is really cool, but I got to see my own epiglottis working on a camera before because I had FEES, so the fiber optic endoscopic evaluation of swallowing, which was done by an ENT, and it was really cool. It was a lot more curled around than I was expecting it to be, and it was just really cool to kind of see how it works during swallowing. So basically when we swallow, the whole laryngeal structure moves up, and then the epiglottis folds over to cover the glottis, or the open space, which hopefully then gets the bolus not to enter the airway. So it just covers that up to kind of add a layer of protection, so the bolus kind of goes over that and into the pharynx. One more important structure in the larynx is the hyoid bone. It sits above all the other structures and attached to them by different muscles. It's mainly involved in like moving the larynx as a whole up and down during speech and swallowing. And then for me, what I use the hyoid as a good marking point for remembering which muscles elevate and which lower, because it's kind of like the ones that are above the hyoid pull up the whole structure, the ones that are below the hyoid pull down the whole structure. If you're looking for it on yourself, you can kind of feel. So you'll feel up your neck, find your Adam's apple. You can find the notch right above that, and then there's a little space, and then right above that space you'll feel something else that's hard, and that's your hyoid bone. It's really cool for laryngeal massage when we massage either side of that and then move the hyoid side to side to kind of loosen up all those muscles. For voice, my supervisor taught me how to do it with swallowing clients as well, which was really interesting. Okay, moving on from the cartilages, let's get into the muscles. There are both intrinsic and extrinsic muscles. So the intrinsic are inside the larynx and attached to cartilages like right inside the larynx. So one cartilage in the larynx to another cartilage in the larynx. Those intrinsic muscles then control the vocal folds by adducting, putting them together, or abducting, pulling the vocal folds apart. They might stretch or relax the vocal folds, and they might tense the vocal folds, which gives us a lot of our pitch variation and is also important for protecting the airway. We'll get into later how exactly the folds vibrate to make the sound. But during swallowing, the vocal folds need to be tightly adducted or put together just in case a bolus does make it past the epiglottis. The muscles actually kind of really help us out to remember where they are just by their name and what they might do. Their names all have the names of the two cartilages that they attach to on either side. So if you think about what two cartilage names are in the muscle, you can figure out where it is. And then thinking about, well, how would the muscle have to be kind of oriented in here to connect to both of those? Then you can think about, well, if it's angled like this, I can see it pulling like this, or if they're like this, I can see them pulling this way, this way. You can kind of think in your mind as like a reminder of what they do. There are 4 major intrinsic muscle groups to remember. First, we have the interarytenoids with their transverse and oblique members. Then we have the cricoarytenoids, which have lateral and posterior versions. There is the cricothyroid, which has 2 different parts, and then the thyroarytenoids, medial and lateral or external and internal versions. I found names that people that call them medial and lateral, and then other people that call them external and internal. But the innervation for these muscles is fairly easy to remember. They're all innervated by the recurrent laryngeal branch of cranial nerve 10, which is the vagus, except for the cricothyroid, which is innervated by the external part of the superior laryngeal branch of cranial nerve 10. So either way, it's all the vagus nerve, but it's just most of them are controlled by the recurrent laryngeal branch, and then the cricothyroid is controlled by the superior laryngeal branch. All right, so I'm going to give a really quick rundown of all of the muscles and what they do. Again, if you're following along with the notes, I put in there their action, their innervation, and then kind of some tips to remember where they're located. And then there's some diagrams on here that you can take a look at as well. So first, we'll go over the interarytenoids first. So inter, meaning like between, and the arytenoid. So these muscles run between the 2 arytenoid cartilages. So if you're looking at the diagram on the notes, we are looking at it from the posterior view. We're looking at it from the back. And they are running horizontally or transverse in the transverse plane between the 2 arytenoids. So what they're going to do, they are going to pull those arytenoids together. So if you think about it, if they're running like this, the only way that the fibers can go are this way. So the fibers are going to run this way. So it's going to pull the arytenoids together, which is then going to adduct the vocal folds. So the transverse interarytenoid would take both of those arytenoids and it would close them together, which would then pull the folds together. You have the oblique interarytenoid as well, which adducts or puts together the top part of the arytenoids. So it connects from the top of one arytenoid down to the bottom of the other arytenoid, and then the other one top to bottom. So it makes like an X. So you have the transverse and then the oblique interarytenoids that sit on top of the transverse. These also just pull together this way. They're kind of gliding them back and forth like this. Okay, but next we're going to get into the cricoarytenoid muscles. So the cricoarytenoids attach from the cricoid to the arytenoids. The posterior cricoarytenoid is the only abductor, so it's the only muscle that's going to pull the vocal folds apart. How it does this is it rotates the arytenoids. So the posterior cricoarytenoid rotates out, which then opens up the folds. So if the folds were attached to my thumb, it's going to rotate like this, which is going to open up this space. The lateral cricoarytenoid is going to rotate the folds closed, like that. So it's going to put them together. So posterior opens, the lateral closes. So the lateral cricoarytenoid is attached from the sides, because we think lateral, we think sides. So it's attached from the sides of the cricoid back to the arytenoids. And the posterior is attached from the back of the cricoid up to the arytenoids. Moving on from that, we will get to the cricothyroid, which has two different parts. It's one muscle, but it kind of has two different branches off of it. The first is the pars oblique, and the second is the pars recta. So the pars oblique is located, now we're moving to the front. So it's the front of the cricoid cartilage, and then it stretches back to the inferior cornu, so the bottom horn of the thyroid cartilage. So it's kind of going up just a little bit, but it's on an angle. It's a pretty steep angle up to the back part of the thyroid. So what this is going to do is it is going to pull the thyroid forward. So it's grabbing it from the back, so it's going to just pull it straight toward the front, which is going to take the whole thyroid out. So on here, it's going to go, thyroid is going to go this way. Then we have the pars recta. This one has less of an angle than the oblique, but it also is going to increase like the length of the vocal folds. But instead of just pulling out the thyroid, it rotates it down because this muscle, the pars recta, is attached more forward than the pars oblique is. So it's attached to the bottom of the actual lamina. So it's all along this front. It attaches right here. And when it pulls down, it takes the whole thing and rotates it down. So when we go to increase our pitch by stretching out the vocal folds, our thyroid is doing this kind of motion. It's moving out, but also like this. So if you think of a cord attached here, what's it going to do to the cord? It's going to stretch it like that. So it's going to go out and down like that, out and rotate. Those are the cricothyroids. Finally, we have the thyroarytenoid muscle. Now this one is two parts again. One of the parts is the actual vocal fold. One with like the innermost layer, the most important layer of the vocal fold is this one thyroarytenoid muscle. So there are two parts, like we mentioned. There's an internal and an external, or a medial and a lateral. The medial one is the internal one. That's the one that's on the inside. If you're looking at the diagram, it's the one that's right in the middle. Then you'll have the other two folds on the outside. Those are the external portions. That middle portion is the vocal fold. That is the vocalis muscle. The other ones that are on the outside are called the thyromuscularis. Again, to reiterate, these will adjust the pitch by tensing and relaxing the vocal folds, or kind of stretching them out and then putting them back. Okay, those are the intrinsic muscles of the larynx. Next, we are going to move on to the 10 intrinsic muscles. They're all innervated by different cranial nerves and some spinal nerves. So I have those written down on the diagram so you can see from there. But as you kind of study more into the different systems, you kind of learn that they all kind of overlap. So a lot of the ones that are attached to the tongue are innervated by the same kinds of muscles. A lot of the ones that are attached, like the pharynx, those are the same kinds of muscles. So you kind of learn by system, and then it'll make a lot more sense in future videos as we go over more of these muscles. So the extrinsic muscles are broken down into two types. There are elevators and depressors. The elevators will lift up the entire larynx, and they all are above the hyoid bone. So they all attach to the hyoid bone, but they go up. So think of my hyoid bone is about here. So hyoid bone, anything that goes above that is my elevators. Anything that goes below that is the depressors that's going to pull the whole thing down. I'm just going to quickly list them, and that's because they all kind of have the same general job to either elevate or pull down. So first we have the digastric, which runs under the tongue to the hyoid. We have the mylohyoid, which kind of goes like around the jaw to the hyoid bone. We have the genioglossus, is not shown on this diagram, but it would be kind of next to that digastric. It goes from like the chin area to the tongue. You have the geniohyoid, which goes from the chin to the hyoid. the stylohyoid, which runs from the styloid process of your mastoid bone back to the hyoid, and then the hyoglossus, which goes from the hyoid to the tongue, glossus meaning tongue. The depressors then, there's 4 big ones to remember. We have the omohyoid, and then omo runs to like your clavicle. Sternohyoid, think of sternum to your hyoid. Then sternothyroid, the sternum up to the thyroid. And then the thyrohyoid, which is the thyroid to the hyoid bone. And all of those are going to pull it all down. So that is all of the muscles that we need to know. So we'll move on to the vocal folds themselves. There's a couple different sets of folds in the larynx, and I'll have them up over here so that you can see them over there. There's different layers. So there are the true vocal folds, though, which are the main ones we're going to talk about. Those are the big voice producers. There are also false vocal folds that don't really vibrate all that much. They do give some extra support for things like exertion or excretion, but they're not really that involved in speech unless it's like a really low tone. Then there are the airy epiglottic folds, which we mentioned before. Those run between the back part of the arytenoids up to the epiglottis, and they provide some extra support in protecting the airway. We are, though, going to focus on just the true vocal folds for the next couple of minutes. Okay, so true vocal folds have 5 different layers. We're going to go from the very inside, outside. The innermost part is the medial, or the internal thyroarytenoid muscle, as we talked about, also known as the vocalis. So vocal, vocalis. But remember that one, important for vocalizing, but remember that they're more accurately called folds because the layers don't surround the whole thing. So I'm going to rephrase that. So the muscle is the only cord part that we are thinking of when we're thinking about vocal folds. They're more accurately called folds because the layers of the vocal folds that go on top of that muscle act like, say you stacked a couple blankets together. You would stack the blankets, and then if you were going to fold all of that at once, you'd get different folds. It's not wrapping all the way around something, it's just kind of folding over. So you have like little folds. So that's why we're calling them folds and not cords in this video. And then when we get to the different layers, remember they're not going all the way around. It's not like a pipe. So the first layer then that goes right over the muscle is the deep lamina propria. And then above that is the intermediate lamina propria. These have a lot of like collagen and elastin fibers in them, which give them a little bit more structure. They're still kind of elastic though, so stretchy. And that's why those 2 layers are collectively known as the vocal ligament. So you could think of it as, okay, so the vocalis muscle is wrapped by the vocal ligament. But just remember that the ligament is made up of 2 lamina propria, the deep and the intermediate. On top of that is the superficial lamina propria, which is more of like a jelly consistency. It gives a little more cushion, a little more give, not too much like structure. And sometimes that is called Reinke's space. And then the last blanket layer is the epithelial cells, which are kind of like a skin covering, which goes over the whole thing. So the bigger the vocal folds then, and the more elastic they are, the deeper the voice is going to sound overall. But if they're stretched, if anybody's vocal folds are stretched and stiffened and lengthened, the pitch is going to increase. And then vice versa if they're relaxed. We are almost done with this, guys. We can get through this. We just have to go over the sciencey part. So now that we have gone very briefly over what everything is in there, now we got to figure out how they actually all work together to do this. So the main theory that we talk about today when we're thinking of voice production is the Myoelastic-Aerodynamic Theory. And the big science law behind it is Bernoulli's law, and that explains how the vocal folds actually vibrate. It's different from how a rubber band is going to work because unlike a rubber band, remember these are folds, not cords. It's a little bit more detailed than just vibrating back and forth. So Bernoulli's law states that as a space decreases, as you have a more narrow passageway, the air, or the molecules in general, but we're talking about air, the air that moves through it is going to increase in its velocity or speed, and thereby decrease the pressure on the walls of the cavity. But when the vocal folds are approximated or adducted, there's a smaller space. That means the air that's pushing through is going to speed up. But it's a little bit more complicated than just the air speeding up. It's not just air pushing up through here and poof, the whole thing just pops open. It kind of happens in layers. First, so we start with adducted vocal folds. Then the tracheal pressure builds up beneath the vocal folds. That's the air pressure coming up from the lungs. That pressure then pushes the vocal folds open. They peel apart from the inferior layer, so the bottom part goes first to the top, like that, and then from the back to the front. And that's how they are going to open and close. So it has this surface tension. They're kind of like always wet and sticky. And then the muscular recoil, which just means they'll bounce back, like the actual vocal fold muscle, it's going to bounce back because it's elastic. That closes it back up the same way. So you have Bernoulli's principle happening. So this air pushes through, we open the bottom and the back. So it like opens the bottom and the back like that. And then as the air's going through, the pressure's decreased, so they relax a little bit. They're sticky, so they're going to stick back together and they'll fold. So this is going to look really weird, but I'll show you kind of like what it does, because it goes back and forth. It kind of goes like this kind of a thing. They're kind of, so they're not just opening and closing, vibrating. They're kind of like rolling almost like a circular motion. And that's how it pushes back through. I'm not going to get into like the rest of the speech science today, just because it's a bit dense and I think it really needs its own dedicated video. But keep following along for when I upload that one, and when we get to it, we'll talk about the different registers and vocal qualities, because as these are opening and closing, there's different phases that we like to talk about. And depending on how long each of those phases are, so like the open phase, the closed phase, during each like rotating cycle like that, we'll get to different kind of registers, different vocal qualities, like is it hoarse or breathy or rough. And then we'll also talk about some acoustic measurements that we talk about in like voice. I'm assuming you guys have probably, if you're in an SLP grad program, you've probably had the experience with the program Pratt in your own speech acoustics courses. It's not everybody's favorite, but I do think it's cool. So we might do a little bit of that, just kind of looking at how the different formats look when we produce vowels and things like that. But we'll get into that later. But for now, the biggest thing to remember with producing voice is this myoelastic-aerodynamic theory, where the air is pushing up and it opens from the bottom to the top and then from the back to the front all at the same time. So it's like whoop, whoop, and then it closes back up because of the surface tension pulling it back together, like suctions. But we did it, guys. So that's another very quick run through of a speech subsystem. And if you're studying along with me, hit subscribe and say hi in the comments. Let's conquer this exam together, and let me know below what topics you think I should cover next. Thanks, guys. Bye.